I want to talk to you about prisoner reentry using entrepreneurship and self-employment. I know a little bit about this because I started 3 years ago Project Remake in the United Kingdom. Project Remake teaches entrepreneurship and self-employment to formerly incarcerated people. We use business mentors, we use student mentors, we use venture capitalists to give them training and a start. And we have had no reoffending in 3 years. We have people we've realized who have talent, and we tap into that talent to get them back into society. I wanted to lay the landscape first and tell you a little bit about what we have in the United Kingdom. We have a government policy which I think to a large extent has failed. We have 50 to 60% reoffending in the first year of release. We have had 7 government ministers in 14 years, and the reoffending rate has doubled in the last 5 to 8 years. So we have a crisis on our hands. We have a white paper produced last year, which is 65 pages long, that did not mention the word entrepreneurship. So we have a policy that sees us spending £18.1 billion a year on incarceration. 86% of that budget goes on incarceration, and 14%, only 14%, goes on education. We have a huge collateral damage. Family, care, children, the victims of a policy that has failed. So we have in Britain a situation where we are not teaching people who are incarcerated any skills. It's a revolving door. They come out and they go back in. Because if you look at prison, there's no learning. We now have cells which had 1 person, 21,000 cells now have 2 people. And we have 66,000 people who are serving 6 months or less in prison. What is the point of a 6-month sentence? The damage that does is huge. But really, the real prison sentence starts when you leave prison. No job, no money, and no place to live. Housing benefit is stopped for people who have done 13 weeks in prison, and universal credit, which is another benefit, it does not kick in for 6 weeks. So people leave prison with £46. By the time they get into town and buy a meal, they are probably on £20, and that tariff has operated for 25 years. So what happens in 48 hours? With no money, no place to live, they break a car and they go straight back into prison. That is the policy we now have, a revolving door. This is not all bad because the third sector has stepped in, the faith-based sectors, the social impact sectors have stepped in to do a lot of the work that government should be doing. But the reality is that we have a large pool of talent, a large set of people who should be skilled, trained, who have business sense, but who are simply kept in prison. We are paying £40,000 a year to incarcerate a person who sits in a prison cell for 23 hours. What is the return on your money? If you were a businessman, you were spending £40,000, you'd say, what's my return? Well, there's no return here, really. And, you know, I could tell you many stories. I could tell you the story of Mikey. He had over 800 clients. He knew their name, their contact, where they lived. He gave them extra drugs on weekends. The customer care was incredible. Yes, it's an illegal business, but he had all the intuition of a business person, of the person who starts a business, of a person who runs a startup. He knew his clients. He knew his customers. What is the mindset of these people? Are they all bad people? Are we going to write them off? And the short answer is no. These are people who have no risk in their vision. They're not prescribed by rules. They have started a business, albeit an illegal business, and they have very much an entrepreneurial mindset. They have the mindset of a startup person, of a founder. And when I look at this group of people, when you look at their life in prison, it is a life where there's complete uncertainty. The only certainty is uncertainty. They have no control over their food, over their clothes, how they live, what time they get up. So there's a very fluid expectation. They're very fluid with their life and how they deal with things. And that fluidity gives them a kind of resilience, a kind of agility, which is critical in the way they deal with their life. They are people who are in a dark place, dark clothes, a dark cell, and they must add the color to their life. They are people who must visualize themselves differently. And it is in that visualization, that ability to see themselves as different people, that creates this resilience, that creates this creativity, that creates this person who essentially can make something of their life. Because that is what they have to do every day of their life. They have to deal with what's in front of them. And what's in front of them is completely unknown. So you have a huge pool of talent of people who have an entrepreneurial mindset, who are imprisoned, who are locked up. They are self-starters. They are people who have proven in our project Remake to be very successful at business. The business could be very small businesses, a coffee cart, selling a box of vegetables in a market stall, selling Caribbean juice in a market stall, and so on. The point is, we have had no reoffending in 3 years. And government policy has 50 to 60% reoffending per year. So I can tell you straight away which is the better system. Now, the question is, how do we make a change? What change do we actually make? And I'm going here today to tell you how I see the change that we could facilitate. I don't have all the answers, but I could suggest some answers to you. The first thing is, when you enter prison, there should immediately be a learning plan. You should know what you're doing for the next 12 months to 2 years. You should be learning a skill. The environment should not be hostile. Prison guards could facilitate a learning program. They could be something of a mentor. So make learning the heart of prison, and if you learn a skill, you should be released early. It should be an incentive to be released. The second point is, you should classify offenders according to risk and need. We shouldn't lump everyone together in a large pen and keep them there for 23 hours. That doesn't work. If you have a drug offender, they should be treated differently. If you have a violent person, they should be treated differently. But we should identify the learners, the people who want to learn. So we reimagine, we rethink the prison estate as being something very different. And we give everyone in prison a laptop. You can create an intranet in prison. You could put courses from Coursera or Edemy or Allison.com where you learn skills, you learn history, you learn to improve yourself, you learn presentation skills. And I think part of that, we can create an entrepreneurship network within prison, with mentors and people and companies who are involved in hiring people. We could bring within prison an entrepreneurship network that links different prisons, for example. We should provide training which is competency-based. How to fix a fridge, how to fix a stove, how to fix a bike. Because that gets you a job when you're released. And when you're released, you should go straight into an apprenticeship. Because when you come out of prison, you may go left, which is straight back to where you were, or you can go right into the apprenticeship. And that apprenticeship gives your life structure. You pay a living wage and you learn skills. We use the apprenticeship levy or Kickstart. The apprenticeship levy now is not fit for purpose. There are millions and millions in corporates which is not being used. Make it accessible. And then when you have the apprenticeship, you have peer review. peer review, which gives you the certification and the qualification you require. These people cannot pay £1,300 or £1,500 to get a qualification. There's a great program in the US called Degreed, which is a skills platform. For $69, you can get your qualification validated on a peer review basis. So, what I'm saying is, do not lock people up for 23 hours a day. Do not spend £40,000 simply incarcerating people. Have support, have CV training, have presentation training, have skills training, have a jobs board for people who are going to be released. And with Project Remake, we are very successfully engaged with Capita PLC in the UK, a company that takes all our graduates and gives them a 12-week placement. And then, if they are successful, they get a job. One chap who graduated from Project Remake said to me, after 10 years being incarcerated, he said, getting a job gives me goosebumps. That is the impact of giving an ex-offender a job. It's a game changer. The next thing I would suggest is you make prison something of a startup. So the prisoners fix the plumbing, the central heating, they learn how to do electrics, etc. And they do that with contractors. And you pay a living wage to them. And that wage in part could be used to fund their own incarceration, or it can be used to fund their training. But the point is you engage, you make prison a place of learning, not a place of incarceration. And the very contractors who they work with may well give them a job when they're released. One of the huge areas in which a change can be made is what I will call diversity and inclusion. Government should make it a requirement for all companies which are bidding on government contracts to hire marginalized people, such as offenders, and provide training. So you cannot bid on government contracts unless you are hiring people from the marginalized sector. And then what you can say is when you hire them, if they do not reoffend for 2 years, you get a double tax break on what you pay to train them and what you pay in their wages. That's a huge incentive. It's almost like a social impact bond that allows you to hire people and then to get a tax break or to get a return. I also think universities and colleges, of which there are over 1,000 in the UK, should be centers of learning for people. Get people who have been incarcerated sit in on Introduction to Business, Introduction to Law. It gives the students a different perspective coming from people who have not had formal education. Get them to work with the contractors to get work experience, and get them to do Project Remake, which is an entrepreneurial training program which we run at King's College, Queen Mary College, and other colleges. And what actually you see, one of the great memories I have of our first Remake class, because we have changed since the coronavirus to have classes by Zoom, is the graduation ceremony. The graduation ceremony at King's College in the Great Room had families, children, wives, girlfriends come. And they saw people who were incarcerated graduate. The Dean of Law shook their hand and gave them a certificate. For people who have never graduated, to be at King's College, where they wear the hat and the t-shirt, it means they come to tell themselves a different story of themselves. It means they come to believe that they can be a somebody. And that is the thing that you change. You change the mindset, you change the vision, you change the story people tell themselves. The last way I think that we can help is by introducing into business schools, and there are hundreds of business schools, a course that trains our future business leaders or MBA people how to use people who are ex-offenders or from marginalized group. Be aware of the talent. Be aware of a diverse workforce. Tap into this talent pool. Get the corporates to go into prison to meet people, shake their hand, realize they're people just like us. I think that can be make a huge difference to the life of people you wish to employ. Because you see, 90% of people who are ex-offenders who apply for jobs, they simply do not get the job, or an algorithm would reject them. So what I'm saying is make release count. You're paying £46 but to a person who's been released, but you're paying £118 to reincarcerate them. That makes no sense. Give them sufficient money to start off, to get a hostel room, to get training, to establish themselves so that they do not go back into prison. And I just want to tell you a little story of Frank, whose picture is here. And Frank was incarcerated for 10 years. And I've encouraged Frank to tell his story and write his story, which is very cathartic. I've come to understand and know him. He's changed. He has a family. He feeds his family. He has a home improvement business. And what Project Remake has done for him, other than the training, is to create community and to create purpose. He has repurposed his life. He's proud, and we are proud of him. And he's a great example of what Project Remake stands for when we say, you may be confined by prison, do not be defined by prison. So let's make a change. Let's treat ex-offenders differently, and let's try and bring them back into society, as I have suggested today. Thank you so very much.